Hello again, everybody. I believe this is the fifth lecture video lecture on chapter one. In this lecture, in this recording, I want to talk specifically about Maslow and humanist psychology. And if I haven't used up my whole 10 minutes, then we'll move on to some of the perspectives of psychology. So Maslow would be considered contemporary. He died in the 1970s. Sort of after, if you want to think about it in historical context, it was after, the 1960s and the free love and all of that. He is credited for what I think is a pretty interesting field of psychologists. I always tell my students if I would to go back to graduate school and be a psychologist, I would be a humanist psychologist. But specifically, what the humanist psychologists are about is about human potential and how we can use what we know about the human brain, about behavioralism, about the subconscious, how we can use all of that research or all of that knowledge to help people become better versions of themselves. So where Freud spent a lot of time understanding how the brain was broken and how people were broken, humanists are really more about positive things. So there's a subfield coming out of the humanist psychology. I want to make sure that's how I have it written down, called positive psychologists. And positive psychologies study things like happiness and coping and resilience, right? So instead of focusing on what makes people sick, humanists and positive psychologists in particular focus on things like what makes people happy and what makes people grow. So maybe you've heard of a phenomena or an idea called Maslow's hierarchy of need. If you're a nursing student, I suspect you have. You should hear of this. And what Maslow's hierarchy of need about is, so it assumes, you imagine it sort of as a triangle, and that there are levels of need. And depending upon what you need, your motivation, which is defined as goal-directed behavior, you will direct your behavior towards meeting whatever that need is. If I had a board, I'm going to have one eventually when it comes in. At the bottom of that level of need would be like safety and security. So the first thing that would motivate people would be a place to sleep. And if they're in a, so for instance, so let me just go back to my example. I get kind of excited about this topic because there's just so much to talk about. But the idea is that if you don't have a safe place to live or a safe place to be, that is what you're going to be striving for. Think about season 1, episode 1 of The Walking Dead. I know that's very old now, but this guy wakes up in the hospital and there's zombies everywhere. What's the first thing he does? Rick, crying. Oh my gosh. First thing he does is he runs from the zombies, because the first goal, the first thing we have to do is to be safe. Once we're safe, then what the next thing Rick does is he starts looking for other people. The next level of need are what he calls social needs, or the needs to be with people, right? You can think of the homeless person. The homeless person, the first thing they do is find a spot where they can get out of the rain or out of the sun or out of the snow. They find a little cubby under the bridge. And then maybe they want to find maybe a dog. And I don't know, some people find it very unusual, weird, that somebody who doesn't have money to feed themselves, like a homeless person sitting on the corner of the highway, would have a pet. But that pet is basically the second level of need, which is social. We don't want to be alone, right? So the next level of need, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's skipping my mind, but the next level of need is what we call esteem needs. And these are needs like feeling like you're a worthy person or wanting to become a better version of yourself, right? So think about the kid at school who's being bullied or maybe doesn't have any lunch. They're not going to be interested in learning because they're more worried about what's going to happen when they go out to the playground, to stay away from the kids that's going to pick on them. Safety and security, or maybe they have no friends. So they're not focusing on what the teacher is talking about because they're feeling alone and isolated, or maybe they're hungry, right? Because the point is that unless we meet these basic human needs, safety, security, social, emotional need, we're never going to get people to want to learn, because learning is kind of psychologically, it's a privileged state. You know, I taught many, many years, and I can't tell you how many students I've had. I always have one pretty much in each semester, especially if I'm teaching non-traditional students, older students who are returning to the classroom after 20 years, right? And they come in and they're real excited and they're dedicated and they just can't wait to learn. And then something happens. Maybe their child gets sick. Their husband loses their job, their partner gets deployed, their partner gets sick, they get sick, whatever, and boom, they're gone, right? Because according to Maslow's hierarchy of need, they were up at that esteem need. They were learning, but now their goal-directed behavior, their motivation, has shifted to a lower need. So now their energy gets directed to finding a place to live because they've just got evicted, or like during natural disaster, during the whole COVID thing. Great example actually of Maslow's hierarchy of need. We're all plugging away in the classroom, we're working really hard, right? We come up to midterm exams, and then boom, there's this pandemic, and now we're all stranded at home. And what did you maybe hear from your teachers? I mean, I know I said it as, take care of your kids first, worry about that first, because we knew that it would be difficult for students to do well in the classroom if their kids were scared, if they had no daycare, if they were worried about paying rent. That's Maslow's hierarchy of need. At the very tip top of this hierarchy is something called self-actualization, which is a very abstract idea. And this is one of the reasons that Maslow gets criticized by researchers, is because you cannot precisely measure what that means. What the dickens does that mean? How do you know if you're self-actualized? Self-actualization means you're the best version of yourself. But how are you gonna know? How will I know when I'm the best version of me, right? All I know is I'm getting older and my hair is getting whiter and whiter, right? But how am I gonna know when I get to be the best version of myself? So he's criticized, this idea is criticized by people who want precision and they want to be able to measure, right, what stage of needs are. But this is a very, very useful idea for social workers, for nurses, for anybody who's trying to help people, because it's a method, it's a model of helping us understand like where someone is at in terms of what do they need if I want them to be a good student? What do they need if I want them to take their medicine? What do they need if I want them to take care of their kids? We may have to address these other things. A good example of Maslow's hierarchy of need in the real world is public housing, is housing of homeless people. And a lot of people who live under the bridge, according to the research, also have addiction issues. They're also substance users. And I always say, well, if I was living under a bridge, I wouldn't want to be sober either. But most places, most housing programs require that homeless people become sober first. They become sober before they get housing. Well, there was a project in New York State that did the reverse, because based on Maslow's hierarchy of need, sobriety is an esteem need. So before they put people in housing first. They gave them safety and security and relationships. They gave them neighbors, and then they got them sober. And what they found is that for a good proportion of people, they stayed sober because they weren't homeless because they were drunk. They were drunk because they were homeless. So they move them up this hierarchy of need. And we'll talk in other chapters, we'll talk about what self-actualization means. I hope that makes some sense. Rogers is kind of a cool dude, and Rogers is also a humanist psychologist, and he's even more contemporary. And Carl Rogers is the fellow that's credited with a phenomenon called unconditional positive regard. And what Rogers argued was that we would never be able to be fully actualized. We would never become the best version of ourselves unless we experience what he called unconditional positive regard, which simply means, I'm going to give you a second, do you know what that means? Which means that regard is when somebody thinks about you. Positive is when somebody thinks about you positively. Unconditional positive regard is when somebody thinks about you positively, when somebody loves you no matter what. Now, who is that person supposed to be? Who is supposed to love you regardless of your behavior? They may not like your behavior, but they still love you. Well, it's supposed to be your parents, right? At the very least, at least one of your parents is supposed to love you no matter what, unconditional. Now, I could probably go around the room, and we all know parents that didn't love their children unconditionally. Well, our culture has a nifty backup for who's supposed to love you unconditionally. God, right? That's supposed to love you. But Rogers said you will never become the best version of yourself unless you are granted someone loves you no matter what. Some of the other concepts is what he called student-centered learning, which is the idea that teachers teach to the student and how the student learns, not how I should be teaching the way that is best for you, not what's best for me. Existentialism, which is a fun abstract idea. Existentialism, if you've ever heard the idea of an existential crisis. Existential crises are common at two different stages in life. One is when you're about 20, when you're launching from your parents' household to your own, and another is when you're about 40, mid-40s. Hello, that'd be me. And this is when you go, what's life about? What am I supposed to do here? What's the purpose of, and the question is basically like, what does it mean to be me? Who am I? All of those big philosophical questions, and that we attribute all that to Carl Rogers. Okay, it's now almost 12 minutes, so I'm going to stop. And then the last video lecture, I'll talk about some of these perspectives and also that are mentioned in your text.